The dust storm had followed the struggling cowboy for 3 days straight, like fate refusing to let him disappear quietly. And by the time he reached the edge of the valley, his horse was limping, his stomach hollow, and his pride scraped raw by too many closed doors and unpaid debts. His name was Clay Morgan, once known across the plains as a steady hand with honest eyes, now just another broken rider chased by bad seasons and worse luck. The ranch he'd inherited from his father lay behind him in ruins, the fences torn down by storms, the cattle sold one by one to keep hunger away, until even hunger grew tired of waiting. Clay had come to this valley with no plan except survival, believing rumors of a widow who ruled her land like a fortress and paid fair coin for strong labor. But he hadn't believed the stories of her size, her strength, or the fire in her voice. When he first saw her standing near the barn, framed by mountains and sunlight, he stopped breathing. She was tall, unnaturally so, broad-shouldered, solid as the oak posts she leaned against, her shadow stretching long across the ground like it belonged to something greater than a woman. Her name was Margaret Hale, though most men called her the Giant Widow, not to her face, not if they valued their teeth. She had buried her husband 3 winters ago after a land dispute ended in blood, and since then she had run the ranch alone, fighting off greedy neighbors, drought, and the silent judgment of a world that didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to bend. Clay didn't know why he dismounted instead of turning away. Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, sharp, lonely, watching him like she'd already measured the weight of his soul. She didn't ask his name when he approached. She didn't ask where he came from. She only looked at his horse, his torn gloves, his sunburned face, and said, "You look like a man who's lost everything." Clay swallowed his pride and nodded. That was when she said the words that would change both their lives forever. "I need a husband," she declared, her voice calm but unyielding, carrying across the yard. Clay laughed. He couldn't help it, because desperation sometimes sounds like madness, and madness sometimes sounds like hope. But then she stepped closer, towering over him, and added, "And you need a strong daughter to inherit something worth living for." Her words struck him harder than any fist. A daughter? He hadn't had a family since his parents died, hadn't dared dream of roots when the ground kept falling away beneath his boots. She explained without softness, without shame. Her land was vast, her bloodline strong, but the law favored men, and enemies circled like wolves waiting for weakness. She needed a name beside hers, a man willing to stand, not rule. In return, she offered protection, purpose, and a future that didn't end in a shallow grave. Clay wanted to refuse. Pride screamed at him. Fear warned him. But when she turned away, already assuming his answer, he realized something terrifying. This was the first time in years anyone had looked at him like he mattered. He stayed. The valley watched. Whispers followed him through the bunkhouse and fields. Men mocked him behind their hands. Women stared with curiosity and envy. Margaret worked harder than any of them, lifting beams, breaking horses, standing guard at night with a rifle across her knees. Clay learned quickly that her strength wasn't just physical. It was forged from loss, loneliness, and a refusal to kneel before fate. Slowly, respect replaced rumor, but danger never left. A neighboring rancher, Edwin Cole, had wanted Margaret's land since her husband died, and Clay's arrival only sharpened his hunger. Threats came quietly at first: cut fences, poisoned wells, shadows moving where they shouldn't. One night, as the wind howled and the moon vanished behind clouds, Clay realized the truth. Margaret hadn't chosen him because he was strong. She had chosen him because he was willing. And in the Wild West, willingness was rarer than gold. As gunfire echoed across the hills and enemies closed in, Clay understood the bargain he had accepted wasn't about marriage. It was about legacy, survival, and standing between a powerful woman and a world determined to break her. And for the first time since losing everything, Clay Morgan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. If this story is pulling you in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because Chapter 2 brings betrayal, blood, and a choice that will change the valley forever. The valley did not sleep the night the first shots rang out, because violence in the West was like fire. It never arrived alone, and once it started, it spread with hunger. Clay was awake when the fence exploded in splinters, the crack of rifle fire echoing through the hills like thunder announcing judgment. Margaret was already moving before he could shout her name, her long stride eating the distance between the house and the barn as she reached for the rifle. mounted by the door, her face calm, terrifyingly focused, like a storm that had finally found direction. Clay followed, fear burning in his chest but resolve anchoring his feet, because running had cost him everything once before, and he refused to lose again. Shadows moved along the ridge, 3, maybe 4 men, Cole's men, no doubt, cowards who preferred night and numbers to fairness. Margaret fired first, the recoil barely shifting. Her stance as one of the shadows fell with a cry swallowed by the wind. Clay's hands shook as he raised his own rifle, but when he pulled the trigger, instinct took over and another shadow dropped. In that moment, Clay Morgan stopped being a drifting cowboy and became something else. Entirely a man defending a future. The attack retreated as quickly as it came. But the message was clear. Edwin Cole was done waiting. At dawn, Margaret stood on the porch, blood on her sleeve where a bullet had grazed her arm, staring across the land she had fought for with sweat and loss. And she said quietly, "He's coming in daylight next time." Clay knew she was right. Cole wasn't just after land anymore, he was after control. After proving that a woman, no matter how strong, couldn't stand without being crushed. The town offered no help. The sheriff looked away, the judge took Cole's money, and the people who smiled at Margaret in public whispered behind her back, hoping her fall would remind them of their place in the world. That betrayal cut deeper than bullets. Clay felt it burn inside him, a rage he had never allowed himself before. He confronted Cole in the open, in front of witnesses, his voice steady even as his heart pounded, and declared that Margaret's land would never be taken while he lived. Cole laughed, cruel and confident, and promised Clay would not live long. That night, Margaret finally spoke the words she had held back. Admitting the truth of her bargain, she had never needed a husband for love, only for survival, only for legacy. Her body could bear children strong enough to inherit the land. But without a man's name, the law would tear it apart piece by piece. Clay listened, then surprised them both by saying, "Then let it be more than survival. Let it mean something." What grew between them wasn't gentle or sweet, it was forged in danger. Mutual respect and shared loneliness, a bond that didn't need promises to feel unbreakable. When Cole attacked again, he came openly, with hired guns and false warrants, believing intimidation would finish what bullets had started. Instead, he walked into a valley ready for war. Margaret stood tall, unflinching, Clay beside her, rifle steady, eyes clear. The fight was brutal and fast. Dust, blood, and screams filled the air. Clay took a bullet meant for Margaret, collapsing into the dirt as she roared, a sound so raw, so powerful it froze men where they stood. She fought like legend made flesh, and when the smoke cleared, Cole lay defeated, exposed for his crimes, his power broken in front of the very people who had once feared him. Clay survived, though the wound would mark him forever. As he healed, the valley changed. People returned, fences rose, crops grew, and when the law finally recognized what had always been true, Margaret Hale stood not as a curiosity or a threat, but as a force no one dared deny. She and Clay married quietly, not for spectacle but for unity, and when their daughter was born, strong-lunged, bright-eyed, gripping life with unyielding strength, Clay understood the meaning of Margaret's words that first day in the yard. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a legacy carved from dust and defiance. The giant widow had not been saved by a man. The struggling cowboy had not been rescued by wealth. Together they built something the West could not break. If this story moved you, inspired you, or kept you watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More powerful Wild West legends are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one. Peace never arrived loudly in the valley. It came the way dawn always had, slow, cautious, as if afraid it might be chased away if it moved too fast. Clay healed, but healing in the West was never complete. The bullet had spared his life yet stolen his ease, leaving a dull ache that reminded him every morning that survival carried a price. Margaret watched over him with a quiet intensity, not hovering, not soft, but present in a way that anchored him. The ranch grew stronger under their combined will. Where once fear had ruled, now respect took its place. Men who had laughed behind Clay's back now tipped their hats. Women who once whispered about Margaret's size and strength came seeking her counsel. Yet the greatest challenge did not come from guns or greedy men. It came from the weight of legacy. Their daughter, Anna, grew faster than any child Clay had ever seen, tall and solid even as a toddler, her grip strong, her gaze unflinching. The valley talked again, but this time the stories carried awe instead of mockery. Margaret worried silently, knowing too well how the world punished women who refused to shrink themselves. Clay saw it in her eyes at night, the same fear he carried that loving something, this powerful, meant watching the world try to break it. When drought returned, harsher than before, neighboring ranches began to fail. Families packed up and vanished. Hunger crept back like an old enemy, testing weakened defenses. Clay made a choice that would define him more than any gunfight. He opened their stores, shared water, fed children who were not his own. Some warned him it would ruin them. Margaret said nothing, only watched, then stood beside him as wagons lined up at their gates. The valley survived because of it. Years later, when Anna stood nearly as tall as her mother, Edwin Cole's name was spoken again, not by men seeking revenge, but by officials reopening records, uncovering corruption that stretched far beyond one valley. Margaret testified unflinching, her voice steady as stone, while Clay stood behind her not as protection, but as proof that partnership could change history. When the judgment finally came, the land was secured not just for their family, but written into law as hers by right, not exception. That night, Margaret stood under the stars and admitted something she had never allowed herself to say, that she had once believed strength meant standing alone. Clay answered quietly that he had once believed survival meant never staying anywhere long enough to be hurt. Their daughter listened from the porch, learning without words what leadership truly meant. Years passed. Clay's hair grayed. Margaret's strength never faded, only sharpened. Anna left the valley once, returned stronger, educated, fearless. And when Clay finally lay beneath the same earth that had almost claimed him years before, Margaret did not break. She stood tall at his grave, her daughter beside her, the valley watching in silence. The giant widow was no longer a widow of loss, but a matriarch of legacy. Clay Morgan, the struggling cowboy, had not been remembered for what he lacked, but for what he chose to build. And the valley would tell the story for generations. That once, a woman declared, "I need a husband, and you need a strong daughter." And together they proved that the greatest power in the Wild West was not force but unity. If this final chapter stayed with you, if this story meant something, subscribe to the channel for more powerful legends, untold stories, and unforgettable journeys from the Wild West and beyond.